So last week, obviously, it was a surprising story to see that WWE superstar, now former WWE superstar, Steve Cutler had been released by WWE. Now, obviously, it wasn't really surprising at the time to see that Steve Cutler gets released. He was hardly high up on the totem pole. What was surprising was the timing of it, and of course that he had returned to television in November after a big period of time off of television due to comments made by his The Forgotten Sons faction partner, Jackson Riker. Now, a lot of people have spoken about this. We've spoken about this a couple of times in the news videos that we do every day. Be sure to check those out. Now, a lot of stuff has come out after the fact about this, mostly the stuff about Steve Cutler contracting COVID earlier this year. Now, if you're not aware, basically the story goes that Steve Cutler contracted COVID-19 earlier this year. He tested positive, and it's rumoured, or at least it's speculated, that he contracted this after attending a New Year's Eve party with various wrestlers from various other companies. Now, the wrestlers from those other companies included the likes of Rich Swann and Su Yung from Impact Wrestling. There was Serena Deeb, Marty Scurll there as well. There was Ricochet, Casey Catanzaro, Stacey Irvin Jr., former NXT superstar, was there as well. So obviously there was a lot of discussion that he contracted the virus there, and obviously he was there because he's partners with his girlfriend is the Impact Wrestling Knockouts champion Deonna Purrazzo. So that's how the story goes. They went to this New Year's Eve party. They weren't practicing social distancing. None of them got tested. They weren't wearing masks. They were attending a party, a mass gathering during a pandemic, and he contracted COVID-19 because of that. Vince McMahon, when he found out, the WWE chairman and CEO Vince McMahon, when he found out that Steve Cutler had contracted COVID-19, was reportedly livid and furious, so much so that he decided to eventually release Steve Cutler from the company. Now, there's so much to break down into that one, and obviously the question that we're asking there, I will answer in a second. But just to recap what my thoughts are about that in general. Initially, when I heard that Steve Cutler had been fired because he contracted COVID-19, I thought that was ludicrous, frankly. I did feel that, if you're going to put on shows during a pandemic, and look, frankly, if you're just going to exist during a pandemic, even if you do everything humanly possible, social distancing, mask wearing, hand sanitizing, just staying indoors, there still is a chance you can contract COVID-19. Drew McIntyre, the WWE champion himself, he contracted COVID-19. He has no idea how he contracted it. He said that, look, the only time I go outside is when I go to work. I don't go outside other than that, and I practice social distancing, mask wearing, hand sanitizing, you name it, so I don't know how I got it. So just existing during this time of the pandemic, there's a chance you can catch it. There is a chance you can catch it. And so I felt the fact that Steve Cutler was fired for contracting COVID-19, I thought was ludicrous. I thought it was absolutely ludicrous because we've seen a variety of talent within WWE contract COVID-19 and they still have a job. So I felt that was ridiculous. Once we found out the story that Vince McMahon was particularly unhappy about how Steve Cutler contracted it, that to me changed things slightly. And I say slightly. Because essentially you can see that Steve Cutler contracted COVID-19 by attending this New Year's Eve party with various other wrestlers of other companies like Impact. Impact doesn't test as regularly, or if at all, compared to WWE, where they test before every single TV taping. And attending a mass gathering during a pandemic, no hand sanitizing, no social distancing, no mask wearing, that isn't a good look, in my opinion. Now, I know a lot of people watching this may have different opinions. I know a lot of people may think you're overreacting, or what, you can't attend a New Year's Eve party, you can't live your life, blah, blah, blah. I get it. Other countries, other states, they have different perspectives to it. Over here in the UK right now, we're in lockdown. We've been in lockdown since just before Christmas, since December. This is our third lockdown over here in the UK. Right now, you can't go to work, you have to work from home. You can go outside for a couple of hours a day to do exercise, maybe go to get your groceries, go shopping, that's it. I mean, it is lockdown over here and we're still in the midst of it. It's still not by any stretch of the imagination over. It's still not by any stretch of the imagination under control. Those are the restrictions over here. Now, I know in the state of Florida, where I think all of these guys are living and from, it's different. There aren't really any restrictions, frankly. Pretty much everything is open. Some places require you to wear a mask, some don't. The governor of Florida is saying that you can have as many fans as you want inside of a stadium. So I know things aren't, if you're looking at the legality of it all, things aren't necessarily illegal, and what they did isn't illegal. But I can kind of understand Vince McMahon's perspective on this because, frankly, he has made promises to certain people, specifically Roman Reigns. Roman Reigns, you've got to remember, once the pandemic hit last year, he pulled out. He said, look, I'm not doing WrestleMania. I'm not doing WWE. I'm immunocompromised. You know, I'm at risk. My family's at risk. People around me are at risk. It's just not worth that risk. Pro wrestling isn't worth that risk. I would rather people be alive and myself be alive to be there for my children than get sick or them get sick or whatever. He said, you know what? It's not a case of I don't trust the WWE to produce a safer environment. It's that I don't produce others around in WWE to be as safe as I am or to be as cautious as I am, which is fair. I mean, that's a fair thing to think about anyone when they go outside. Whenever I go outside to do my exercise right now, you know, I don't worry about myself. I have my own precautions, but as other people can walk around or get too close without wearing a mask. Have other people been sanitizing their hands? All that kind of stuff. You know, that is a concern. So rightfully so, when Vince McMahon saw that Steve Cutler contracted this COVID by attending a New Year's Eve party during a pandemic, which frankly, you know, over here, that would be a fine. Over here in the UK, I know it wouldn't in the United States, but Vince McMahon, rightfully so, I think, was very upset about this. You know, he'd made promises to people that it was going to be a safe work environment, and I know you can't control what people do outside of work. WWE would like to, but you can't. But his issue was that Steve Cutler was around all the people backstage at WWE. He was at the Performance Center too, because he was doing the bumping in the big man class that Vince McMahon has wanted some of the bigger wrestlers to walk on at the Performance Center, and he felt that he had just ignored some orders. And again, I really sympathise with Steve Cutler, I do. Do I think he deserved to lose his job? You know, I don't think anyone deserves to lose their job for contracting COVID-19. Do I think he probably needed to be reprimanded or at least spoken to about, look, you have these obligations to stick to, and you have these duties to stick to, not just as a WWE superstar, but as a public figure, as someone that has got a following on social media, as someone that people are going to look to you and your behavior and try and copy it themselves. If fans of Steve Cutler and fans of pro wrestling look at Steve Cutler and see that he's not taking the pandemic seriously, they might not take the pandemic seriously too, and that can lead to massive, massive consequences. So I think he needed to be reminded of that. Does he deserve to be fired? No, I don't think so. I still do think that was a harsh decision. We ultimately don't know as well what WWE have said to their talent about what they should be doing outside of the ring. Obviously, as I mentioned, they can't control whether they stay home or not, but they certainly can remind them of their responsibilities, and maybe Vince McMahon, looking at Steve Cutler and what had happened when he contracted COVID-19, maybe he looked at him and said, in the same way that firing Zelina Vega for the third-party platform situation was to send a message, maybe it was the same thing with Steve Cutler. It was to send a message to the WWE locker room, this won't be tolerated. Yes, we can't control what you do outside of working here, but you still have responsibilities and you need to take this seriously. Again, the irony being that for months, WWE didn't take the pandemic seriously. There was no testing, there was no mask wearing, there was no hand sanitizing when they were doing them shows at the WWE Performance Center, so much so that Roman Reigns, Kevin Owens, Sami Zayn, they all went home because they didn't feel safe. Talent was being led into the Performance Center without any tests. They were just having their temperature checked, and if it was high, they let them in anyway. They were doing medical questionnaires. I mean, it was outrageous. So to kind of imply that, oh, we're taking this seriously now, it's like, well, you took your time. Nevertheless, the question here is, will Steve Cutler head to Impact Wrestling once his non-compete clause expires? I think so. I would say yes. Obviously, he has the ties to Impact Wrestling. He is the partner of the Impact Wrestling Knockouts champion, Deonna Purrazzo. Does that mean he's a shoo-in and he's a guaranteed to go to Impact Wrestling? Of course it isn't. But I think, considering he has those ties there, and he was at that New Year's Eve party, who was there also, but the Impact World Champion Rich Swann and an Impact Wrestling Knockout in Su Yung. There's ties there. And look, he is a former WWE superstar, and Impact Wrestling, I don't think they want to go down the same road like they did in the mid-2000s or late 2000s when they're just hiring any former WWE superstar. But Steve Cutler, regardless of how it ended with him in WWE, regardless of the way that it ended with him contracting COVID by going to that New Year's Eve party, he has a very good reputation. He's a hard worker. Reportedly, he was well liked in the WWE Performance Center and well liked by those in WWE. It was just a Vince McMahon-ism, the reason that he was fired. So he's got a good reputation. He's got ties to Impact Wrestling. Once his 90-day non-compete clause has expired, I would expect him to go to Impact Wrestling. I think if you look at the other options available for him, if this was a normal time and we weren't currently in a pandemic and we weren't stuck at home, I would think it's probably likely that he would hit the independent scene and then maybe go to an Impact. But frankly, if you're going to look at his options, is he going to go to AEW? I don't think so. Without trying to sound too disrespectful, I don't think he's a big enough star that an AEW would be like, we've got to get him. If they got him, I think he'd probably end up on Dark. I can't see him getting on a Dynamite. He could obviously work his way up, but I just can't see that. Ring of Honor, there's possibility, and the same with MLW and smaller promotions like that. But I think given the ties that he already has to Impact, the friendships that he has with the likes of Rich Swann, Su Yung, and obviously the partnership he has with Deonna Purrazzo, it just makes a lot of sense that he would go to Impact Wrestling. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him go there. Given that it's a 90-day non-compete clause, that's about 3 months, so that's what, March, April, May. So probably around May time we're going to expect to see him there. So I wouldn't expect to see him show up to Impact Wrestling at Impact Rebellion. I know some people are already predicting that he will show up at Impact Rebellion. I just don't see that. I don't think the timings work out of that. But maybe as we get closer to Slammiversary in July, that's certainly a possibility. So I wouldn't be stunned in the slightest if Steve Cutler goes to Impact. And I think he'll be very successful there. I mean, he's a very good wrestler. I don't think we ever saw the potential that he had in WWE. I wasn't massive a fan of the Forgotten Sons gimmick anyway, and the whole Knights of the Lone Wolf deal. I mean, it didn't even last long enough for anyone really to judge it. So we haven't really seen him step out on his own, be a single star. I don't even really, we saw the Forgotten Sons stuff a little bit in terms of the promos and tag teaming with Wesley Blake in NXT, but we never really saw a lot of Steve Cutler on his own, cutting promos, his own style in the ring. So I think an Impact Wrestling would be very beneficial to see that come out of him. He could establish more of his singles persona, have more longer form matches, create a character. This is a chance to turn a negative into a positive. Really reinvent yourself, do something different. As they say in the industry, go away and learn a new hold, brother. I think it'll probably be a situation like that. So I really wouldn't be surprised to see him end up in Impact Wrestling. As far as reports or news about it, we really haven't heard anything. It's still very fresh news about his release coming last week, and I'm sure he's still digesting that. But I wouldn't be surprised if Impact Wrestling are on the phone or Deonna Purrazzo has said to him, look, there's been people asking if you're interested in Impact Wrestling. Do you want to come in? I would be very, very, very surprised if at some point in 2021 we don't see Steve Cutler inside of an Impact Wrestling ring. Of course, anything's possible. And maybe he does go to an AEW and he starts off an AEW Dark. I just think at this point of time, it makes more sense for him to go to Impact Wrestling. But another thing that I did want to talk about when it comes to Steve Cutler, and I mentioned the whole COVID situation and going to that New Year's Eve party, and maybe some may feel I'm being a bit too harsh. As I mentioned, I really don't think he should have lost his job. I think he should have maybe been reprimanded, reminded of his responsibilities. We've seen that a lot over here in the UK with professional sports athletes and celebrities. We've seen people who have breached COVID protocols or been seen out at parties or been seen far away from their homes, getting haircuts, all that kind of stuff, which isn't allowed over here in the UK. And essentially, it's the same line that's delivered from people in, say, like the Premier League in football over here, where they go, well, we've had a chat and they've been reminded of their responsibilities. No one's lost their job, really, over it. There's been a couple of newscasters over here that, there was one for Sky News over here where she attended a party or was attending some function, didn't have a mask on, and it broke COVID protocol. She was suspended. She didn't lose her job or anything like that. And I think it should be the same thing for Steve Cutler, frankly. I don't think he should have lost his job, especially to be fired during a pandemic anyway is incredibly tough considering the current financial climate. But to be fired during a pandemic for contracting the virus that the pandemic is about is incredibly harsh, I think. Again, I think he should have just been reminded of his responsibilities, because I really don't condone going to that New Year's Eve party. But at the same time, there's a lot of people in WWE, as I mentioned, who have, one, contracted COVID, haven't been fired. Two, they have flaunted and obviously broken the COVID protocols, or at least sent the wrong message in terms of social distancing, attending parties and stuff like that, and they haven't been fired. Kacy Catanzaro, she was one of the people at that New Year's Eve party, continuously breaks and just basically flouts that she's breaking these COVID protocols. There's a video going around on social media at the moment of a video that she did for WWE where it says, so these are the tips to follow during the pandemic. Don't go outside. We've basically all been told to stay at home. And she's going to all of these parties. They're having surprise parties for her. And Ricochet and all of those guys. And it's like, come on. I get it if you don't believe it. I get it if you don't think it's real. I mean, I understand it. I think it's ludicrous. ludicrous because it is very, very real. People have died, and you have to respect the pandemic. You have to treat it as real. You have to take it seriously, and the fact that people don't, to me, is ludicrous, but that's that aside. But you've got people like Casey Catanzaro, Ricochet, other names within WWE, other high executives in WWE that don't believe it's real, and they still have a job. They didn't get fired. Why? Because there's a double standard. There is a double standard. Once Vince McMahon gets something in his head, that's it. That's it. And Steve Cutler is unfortunate at that. But I think he'll land on his feet. As I mentioned, I think he'll turn a negative into a positive. And I think eventually he will probably end up in Impact Wrestling. But of course, as always, it's just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on Steve Cutler? Do you think he'll end up in Impact Wrestling at some point in 2021? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about Impact Wrestling, WWE, AEW, New Japan Pro Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved in the community. Drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really just help us out here on YouTube. Go up the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now. Or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. And I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.